So, before we start, I want to ask you a very deep, important theological question. And you've got to ponder deeply upon this. And this question is it evil to eat or prefer bland chicken curry? Deep theological question. I mean, what kind of person eats a mild chicken curry? Right? So, years ago, a friend called me up and she said, my daughter just came out of the army and she's doubting her faith. Can you spend some time talking to her? And I said, well, if she wants to meet, I don't meet with people who don't want to meet. I'm not going to force her to. And it turns out her daughter was willing, and she'd served 4 years in the army and had just gotten out, and she was wondering about Christianity. She'd grown up in a Christian home, but she was doubting her faith, especially after her experience in the army. So I met with her 4 or 5 times, and I spent time talking about these things. I have 5 points I go through, and I prove that faith should never be blind, and that's where the concept of the no blind faith comes from. And then I prove that God exists without using the Bible. I use science. And then I actually wrote a book on that, which is called Who is Agent X? And then I proved the New Testament is accurate using archaeology and manuscript evidence. And this is what Jeff was talking about, where you prove the Bible is true without using the Bible, right? You use the evidence about the Bible to prove that it's true. So that way it's not circular reasoning. And then I go to proving Jesus Christ really existed and he really rose from the dead physically. In other words, he was a real person in history, and I don't use the Bible to prove that. And then I use portions of the Bible that we know are agreed by most skeptics to prove that Jesus Christ physically rose from the dead. And then I talk about why Christ had to die and why God must punish sin. So once I got to all, now understand this, by the way, if there is a God who created the entire universe, which is item number 2, right? If there's a God that created the universe, then item number 4, raising somebody from the dead, is quite easy. Right? If you can create life from nothing, you can create matter from nothing, you can bring somebody back from the dead. So once the first thing falls into place, everything else kind of can happen. We just have to prove that it actually happened. It's not that whether it can happen. Yes, it can happen. The fact that you're sitting here means that life occurs and then the universe occurred. And so then our question is, did this creative universe choose to raise Jesus from the dead? And I got through all that. I got through all the proof. I got to the proof that Christianity was necessary and a fact of life. And then she said, I'm starting to believe all this, Neil, but I have one big problem that's holding me back. And I said, I know. It's the problem of evil. She said, well, how did you know that? I said, I know because I get emails from atheists that say things like this. Neil, one of the many reasons now that I'm an atheist / anti-Christian is because the God of the Bible, the Christian God, is very irrational and very evil. I can give you many examples, but we'll try to keep it short. God flooded the earth and killed everyone, that is murder, including children and babies. So the question is, why is there so much evil in the world? And if God exists, why doesn't he stop it? And that's the topic that we have today. How can God exist when there's so much evil in the world? How can I trust God when he's allowed so much pain in my life? But this is not only an unbeliever's question, this is a believer's question. God, why did my wife die? Why did you let 6 million Jews be slaughtered in the Holocaust? Why didn't you stop it? You could have stopped it. Why did my baby die? Surely you could have prevented that. Why did my friend die? Why didn't you heal him? We prayed. I talked to a teenager once. His father had died of cancer just a few years before, like 2 years before. And his question was, why do some good people die young? The standard, why do the good die young? And why would my father be one of them? And the answer to that question will decide who you will be in 10 years. How you respond to life and suffering and pain will determine what kind of person you are going to be in the years to come. Who will you be in 10 years? Will you be an angry victim? Will you be a sad, depressed person? Will you be angry at God because your life has not been easy like that guy next to you? The guy next door, he's got everything's going well, and look at you. You can't even make ends meet. Why? And he's not even a Christian. Will you be fulfilled in life and in God, or will you be a wise teacher or an old curmudgeon? I mean, I have some friends, and they're just becoming grumpy old men. Like, they need Jesus. But we have to have an answer to this question. So to answer this question, I'm going to first answer it in two ways. I'm going to first answer it to the atheist who says God can't exist because there's so much evil in the world. And then I'm going to answer it to the Christian about why is there evil? Why does God not stop evil? So the basic question is, how can there be a God when there's so much evil in the world? But really the question is not that. Because the question is, if God exists, he would not allow death and evil and suffering. So the real question is, how can there be a good God when there's so much evil in the world, right? I was once in a debate here in, the college right up here on Lee Avenue and near 280. San Jose College, right? Yeah. And a group of kids had said, hey, we're in a debate. Can you help us do a debate about God? And I said, well, how much time do you have? And they said, well, we only have 15 minutes for our presentation, 15 minutes for there, and then 10 minutes for ours. I was like, 25 minutes. I said, we can answer all the questions, but there's the evil question you're not going to be able to answer. You don't have enough time for it. So I want you to take that off the table right off the bat. And they said, okay, well, how do we do that? I said, well, here's what you do. You start with your declaration. We believe God is good, but for the debate today, God may be evil and he may hate you and want you to suffer forever. But we're just going to prove there is a God. And I saw the other team take the first 10 pages off the debate and throw it on the floor. Right? Well, today we're going to answer that question. Right? Because why is there a good God? And this is how the atheists phrase it. If God, this is Epicurus, says if God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he's not omnipotent, meaning all-powerful. If he's able but not willing, then he's malevolent, meaning evil. Is he both able and willing, then whence cometh evil? If he's neither able nor willing, then why call him God? And this is a real question, and atheists throw this at me all the time, and they will throw it at you, and you may have asked that question. So what they're trying to say is that either he's unable, how can there be a good God when there's so much evil in the world? Either he's unable to stop the evil, meaning he's not God, or he's unwilling to stop the evil, meaning he isn't good. But here's the problem. What's the first thing you have to say when you make this claim? Right? You have to say that what? Evil exists. First thing you have to do. If you want to make the claim that how can God exist when there's so much evil in the world, you have to admit that evil exists. And as a result of this, you're saying that a good God does not exist. But here's the question. If you say that evil exists, you are then inferring or admitting something. What is it you're inferring if you say evil exists? Not necessarily, but what? There's a difference between good and evil. Right? Because otherwise, if there's no difference between good and evil, what is your question, right? So let's keep going. Now, if there exists a difference between evil and good, how do you know what the difference is? How do you make but we haven't gotten to God yet, right? But how do you know the difference between good and evil? What do you need to be able to make that distinction? You need a standard. You remember in the old days, you walk into Starbucks and the first drink on there was a tall. And you go, tall? How can you have a tall? Don't you need like a normal, or do you need something else? How can you just have a tall? What does that tall mean? I mean, if all drinks start with tall, then tall is short. And then they have a venti. Right? Well, it turns out that Starbucks actually has a whole slew of different drinks. They just don't advertise anymore. In fact, the only thing they put up there is the Grande, I think, or the whatever, right? And you can't get the Trenta in anything but cold drinks. I've tried. I'm like, I want a caramel macchiato and a Trenta. They're like, oh, we don't do that. I'm the customer. You do that. No, I don't. But the point is, you can't say something's tall. I'm tall for Americans, 6'2". But I grew up in Sudan. The Dinka tribesmen are 7 foot tall. I'm short, and I never knew I was tall until I came to America. Oh, I guess I'm tall. I was like, hey, my classmates are like, hey, dude. Right? So here's the thing. If there is no difference, if there is no standard between good and evil, if you don't have a standard of tall or normal, then you can't tell what is good and evil. If there's no standard, then you're saying good and evil are mere preferences. Without a standard, your moral values are merely preferences. It's like saying you like vanilla ice cream, but if somebody else likes banana split ice cream, that's evil. Without an objective moral standard, that's just a preference. You can't take your preference and make it a standard. That's like saying, without a standard, your moral values are merely preferences. So like saying, I can't believe God exists because I don't like spicy chicken curry. Which is an evil thing to say. But hey, how can I say it's evil, right? You just so happen to prefer a good bland ham. Hitler prefers killing Jews. Prior to 1872, every culture preferred having slaves. God prefers making you suffer. Who's to say they or God were or are wrong or bad or evil? It's merely a preference, you see? In which case your complaint is basically that you don't believe in God because you don't like that somebody else loves curry. You don't like God's preferences. You've got to have a standard. But here's the problem. If there is a standard, what do you need? Yes, but we're not there yet. If there is a standard, what do you need? You need a what? You need a standard giver. Right? Now, at this point, you'll say, okay, if there's a standard giver, the question is, who is the standard giver? If that standard giver has to be an authority. Right? Now, so some people will say the standard giver, right, you got to be an authority, because I can say, here's my standard, and you go, well, who are you? I don't care. The standard giver has to have some authority. So I ask the atheist, I go, who's the authority? And like, I want to say it's God, right? But the atheist says there's no God, so I'm like, who's the authority? Who's the standard giver? Who decides what's good and evil? And the atheist will say, well, society. Standard giver is man. And when he says that, I'm like, okay, let me ask you this. Which man? Mother Teresa or Hitler? And you go, no, not Hitler, not Hitler. It's society. I'm okay, fine. Let's talk about the Nazi society. Can they be the standard? No, not them. Why not? Well, here's the reason why, and this is the problem with people. If you look at many people, they'll say that society is the standard giver. What the society decides is what is the standard. Well, here's the problem with it. If society sets the standard today, they can change the standard tomorrow. And this is how I get many of my atheist friends that this doesn't work. I said, before the 1800s, every single society except for the Jews thought that slavery was okay as long as they were not the slaves. Did slavery suddenly become bad in 1872 or in the 1800s in England? Did it suddenly become bad? And they'll say, no, it was always bad. Okay, well, if it was always bad, all of society, except for the Jews, thought that slavery was bad. Why was it bad then? So they have a problem with society. And then I say, well, what about Mother Teresa? Can she set the standard? And the answer is no, it can't be Mother Teresa. Why? Because the standard giver has to have an authority, has to be an authority. And here's the question I ask many atheists, and this actually baffles them. I say, look, if there is no objective morality, why was Hitler wrong? If there is an objective morality, why do you get to decide what it is and not Hitler? Who died and made you king of the whole world? And they'll say, well, I don't know. And the answer really is this: neither of us get to decide what it is. We need an authority who is over all mankind to set the standard. So it can't be Mother Teresa or Hitler or the standard. The person has to have an authority. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't realize, is this is woven into the fabric of our nation. Who is the only person that can tell the slave owner they've got to give up their slaves? Who's the only person that can tell the Nazis you can't kill the Jews? Who's the only person that can tell you have to treat him like a brother, you have to treat her like a sister? The only person who can tell everybody to treat everybody equal has to be somebody who has authority over every single human being, and that can only be who? The Creator, God. And notice I didn't use the Bible to get there. I used plain reasoning. And what does the Declaration of Independence say? We hold these truths to be what? Self-evident. That all men are created equal. It's self-evident. Now, here's the problem there, though, by the way. You can go through so if you don't have a God, so atheists can't have unalienable rights, right? So if you don't have a God, you don't have unalienable rights. But it also depends on which God you have. The Muslim God doesn't give unalienable rights. The Hindu God doesn't give unalienable rights. They have a caste system. The Buddhist God Buddhism is basically atheistic, so there's no God there. You can go through all the religions in the world that preceded Christianity and none, or even came after Christianity, and none of them say all men are created equal, except for Christianity and, oh, by the way, Sikhism, which borrowed it from Christianity. Sikhism is an Indian religion, right? Came in the 1500s. But here's the reality here. Only an authority can give you reality. So what that means is that if your government does not include the God of the Bible, you have no unalienable rights. So without saying that it is the God of the Bible, it is implying it can only be the God of the Bible. Here's the thing, though. You cannot have an authority, you cannot have a God, unalienable rights without an authority. Now, here's the problem, though. Some atheists came and said, well, what if DNA is our authority? Whatever DNA, whatever we evolve into deciding what's good and evil. Well, let me give you an example that I use in my book, 40 Days Towards a More Godly Nation, also in the Jesus Involved Politics book. Let's say we're back in high school, and one night you invite me over to play Scrabble, right? And as you take the Scrabble box, you throw it over on the table, and it spells out, amazingly, one chance in a gazillion, less chance than evolution, right? Because it's going to say, well, hey, evolution, we're going to evolve, right? So less chance than evolution, it says, take out the garbage. You're like, wow, the Scrabble board said take out the garbage. It's a chance in a gazillion. And it's spelled right, too. And so then I turn to you and I say, I think you should take out the garbage. You're like, why? Because the Scrabble board told me? What authority does the Scrabble board have over me? None. So you don't take out the garbage because it's stupid, right? But let's say that doesn't happen and we go the next morning, I leave, and then the next morning you come down and you've forgotten to put away the Scrabble board, and there's a note there, spelled in Scrabble letters. It says, take out the garbage, but underneath it, it says Mom. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess Mom's leaving me a notice. Do you have a bottle for me, Jeff? Can you grab me one? Thanks. And then now the question, oh, right here, we got one. Jeff, thanks.
Oh, wait, that's one and three.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So now let me ask you this. Do you have an obligation to take out the garbage? Yes, because Mom is a person and an authority. So you got to take out the garbage. Now, what if you came down and it said, take out the garbage, but instead of Mom, it said, little brother Timmy? Well, one, Timmy has a lot of time to write out his name. And two, you're like, no, Timmy, I'm not taking out the garbage. Why? Because Timmy's a person, but Timmy has no authority over you. So you need a person who has authority and who's a person. The Scrabble board and accidents are not people and not an authority. So you cannot be obligated to a thing. And that means that you have to have a person, a being who is responsible or has an authority over everybody. And the only being that could do that, so you can't, by the way, you can't get an ought from an is. You can't say, this mic is red, so therefore I got to do this. No. Somebody has to imply that to you, so you can't get an, you can't be obligated to that. Okay, so there can't be any of that, so therefore you need the only standard giver, and the only standard giver that has authority over mankind is what? The creator of mankind. Everybody with me so far? Okay. And by the way, here's a number of verses on, so therefore the standard giver has to be God. And here's a number of verses on God being the source of morality in the law. Okay, so here's the problem, though. We said a good God does not exist, because there's evil in the world. But we just said that if there is no God, the question was, how can God exist when there's so much evil in the world? Well, if there is no God, then there is no authority and standard giver. If there's no authority and standard giver, there is no standard. If there is no standard, then there is no, difference between good and evil. It's just a preference. And if there is no difference between good and evil, then evil doesn't exist. And if evil doesn't exist, your question becomes, how can God exist when there's no evil in the world? Do you see a problem with your question? Let me summarize this for you. In summary, you believe evil disproves God. That means you believe in the difference between good and evil. If so, there must be an objective standard between good and evil, which means there must be an objective moral law. But if there is an objective moral law, you must posit an objective moral law giver. Otherwise, where did it come from? But that is who you're trying to disprove and not prove. If there is no moral law giver, there is no moral law. If there's no moral law, there is no good. If there's no good, there is no evil. What then is your question? You see, the whole thing falls apart the minute you look at it. You can't ask that question because you presume the same thing that you're trying to disprove. So evil exists, so there must be other reasons why evil exists. So when we go back to this, he's either unable to solve evil, or he's unwilling to solve the evil, meaning in God, both are logically false. Okay, and the summary is quite simple. It would seem that your recognition of the presence of evil, rather than disprove the existence of God, actually proved the existence of a supreme moral standard giver. The very fact that the atheist has said evil exists means he presumes God exists. Now, that doesn't mean he's the Christian God, right? But as I've said, it's only the Christian God that says all men are equal. So you can go there. But that's just the logical answer. That tells you that there is another answer. But I haven't given you why evil exists. I haven't given you why God allows evil to exist. I just said that doesn't disprove him. So we have some real questions, like, what about our loved ones who have died? Why does God allow some people to suffer and others to not? What about the evil that men do? What about natural disasters? What about the genetic defects or the death of a young baby? So let's go through this. And as I want to ask you some questions. Something on the nature of God. God can do anything. You see the question mark? That's not a statement, that's a question. Can God do anything? That's what we want to say, right? The question is, or the answer is, actually, it turns out that you know that God can't do anything. Can God sin? No. All right, he cannot sin. He cannot stop being God. Where can you go when you are everywhere? Nowhere. If you're everywhere, you can't go anywhere else. So God can't go anywhere. He's already there. I wanted to go over there. Oh, I'm already there. Oh, I wanted to go. Oh, I'm already there. Right? So he can't do anything. He cannot go anywhere. He cannot learn anything. Right? God cannot do what is actually impossible. For instance, he cannot make a round square in two-dimensional space. Right? He cannot make 1 + 1 = 3. He cannot be illogical. He cannot be irrational. So we know that, and so when you say God can do anything, you're thinking, but he's all-powerful. He is all-powerful, but he cannot do anything irrational and illogical. So here are verses about what God can't do, right? God cannot be not perfect. He cannot be tempted, right? He cannot lie. He is not a man that he should lie. He does not change. God can't change. So a lot of things that God can't do. But here's why this is important, because the very nature of God is rationality. God's character is to be logical, and his character is to be loving. Right? God cannot be not loving. He cannot be not rational. Why do I say this? Because rationality and logic and mathematics are the very fabric of God. You're like, mathematics? Yeah, I'll show you why. The very fabric of God. If they weren't, then they would not exist. They weren't created by Him. Mathematics and logic and rationality were not created by God. They are part of His very nature. They emanate from Him. He cannot violate His own nature, and that's why they are good and necessary things. God has to be logic because God is logical. He cannot be irrational because an irrational God would not exist. He would disappear completely. Right? God, yeah, now you go, well, how can I tell what is part of God's nature and what is not? Here's how you can tell. Here's an easy way. Look at the universe, and if you remove the universe, what remains? That's transcendent. That's what God is. So, logic. You remove the universe, you don't have a universe, you still have logic. You remove the universe, you don't have mathematics. You still have mathematics. That's logic. If you remove the universe, do you still have physics? No. Physics is about the universe. Do you have biology? No. Biology is not transcendent. So God created biology. God created physics. God did not create math. He did not create logic. He did not create set theory. So there's some things. He did not create beauty. Beauty emanates from who He is. The universe reflects His beauty, but He didn't create beauty. It is who He is. It's part of Him. Beauty has always existed. When was 1 + 1 equal to 2? It's always been equal to 2. Doesn't matter what somebody says. Right? So these are what these are. So in the same way, God cannot artificially create relationships. So what is a relationship? A relationship is when you spend time with someone and you get to know them better. You can't artificially create a relationship. Relationship by definition has to develop over time and by interaction and by creating trust. It cannot be pre-programmed. The desire for the relationship can be pre-programmed, but the relationship itself has to develop for us in time and space. I could build a robot and make the robot say it loves me, but does the robot really love me? No, it's a robot. I told it has to. So if God creates an animal or a thing that is forced to love Him, that's not love. That is love, but it's not the love that we want in a relationship. So God cannot develop artificial relationships even though He's God, because it makes no sense. So it is logically impossible for God to create a world with free agents where the free agents are also prevented from sinning. God wants a relationship with you, but if He prevents you from disobeying Him, He has no relationship with you. Make sense? Yes. If mankind does not have the free will to do bad things, they don't have the free will to obey God. They don't have to have the free will to develop a relationship with Him. They are forced to obey Him. You can't have free will unless you're free to choose evil. And if you're free to choose evil, that means some people will. Are you with me? Now, I'm not talking about salvation and predestination. I'm talking about your freedom on a daily basis to do the things that God says to do or to do the things that God says you should never do. Now, it may be logically possible to create a world where free agents have the freedom to sin, and none of them do, but it may not be practically possible in such a way that the world could be actually actualized. So in other words, it's possible that God is unable to create a world where free choices, where nobody makes the free choice to sin. Now, here's the other part. It's illogical and irrational for God to create a world with free choices and a way to disobey God, but when you disobey God, it had no consequences. God is not going to tell you, don't do this because I feel like it. He's going to say, don't do this because it has a bad consequence. He's not capricious. He's not going to say, oh, I just feel that you shouldn't do that. That's not rational. It's illogical. So God can't do that either. So when God tells you not to do something, it's because that something will hurt somebody else. But because God has given the free will to do that something, when you do that something, it will hurt somebody else. You're starting to see how this all works out? It's starting to click in place? Oh, yeah, wait. Okay, now imagine if God created a world where you're free to do anything you wanted, including disobey God. But when you were about to do it, He would stop you from doing it. Did you have free will? No. What about when you did it, He immediately fixed it? I'm going to murder my brother. I'm just going to bring him back to life. then why ask him not to do it? You think God's like, oh man, I'm tired of bringing Abel back from that dead, Cain. Will you stop killing him? No, he has to have the freedom to do it and has to have a consequence. Otherwise, why say no? And if you don't have the ability to do it, then you don't have the free will to do it. You don't have the free will to develop a relationship. Right? So, I want to give you an example. Let's say that, and we're almost there, that you have power sockets, and we get to the point where if you stick a screwdriver in the socket, you don't get a shock. Right? Now I teach my kids, or when my kids were young, like, don't stick a screwdriver in the socket, you get an owie, right? Like, oh, okay, no, I'm not going to do that, right? But what if we get to the point where every circuit has an automatic detector, like, oh yeah, that's a screwdriver, or that's somebody in it, and it turns itself off. Do you think I'm going to spend my time telling my kids not to stick a screwdriver in the socket? No, because every single socket in the entire world has that. Now, you might say, well, what if there's one? Well, then that's not the explanation, right? Then I would tell them. But as long as every socket had nothing, I'm not going to spank their hands when they stick it in the socket, because I want them to learn, right? You tell them, don't put it in, and they try it, and you whack them, and you go, that's a lot less than what you've gotten from the socket. So, if God were able to stop you from being able to hurt others, would the law have any purpose? Why did God give us the law? God gave us the law, why? So that we would not hurt others. If you look at every single one of the laws, the first 4, remember, there's only 2 laws. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. First 4 is love the Lord your God. The last 6 are what? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's the 2 laws. So therefore, the law would have no purpose if they had no consequence. Okay, so why ask someone not to do something they can't do anyway? The only reason you ask someone not to do something is they could do it and it had bad consequences. So how can God give mankind free will to rebel against him if that free will had no real consequences? It's illogical, and God cannot be illogical. If God is going to give mankind free will, it must be that free will can choose options with bad consequences. So here's your choices. Thus, free will must involve the freedom to bring pain to ourselves and others. Your choices are simply this. No one has free will and no one suffers. There's no pain, but there's no relationship. Is that the option you guys want? Or you have the option, everyone has free will and suffering exists, relationship is possible, and there's a way to stop the suffering. And in reality, all your question is robots or free persons, which do you want? That's really all we're asking. Why is there evil? Because God wants you not to be a robot. Now, some people may prefer to be a robot, but then they were programmed to be the robot. Because they wouldn't choose that if they were a robot, right? Okay, so what is the greater good? Genuine relationship and love, or pre-programmed robots who act like they have relationship and love? And the answer is quite simple. The answer is genuine relationships. So this summary is basically, for true love and relationship to exist, evil must be permitted to exist. Everybody with me so far? Now, what does God desire from you? Why did God create you? For a relationship. God desires a relationship with you. He had all the universe. He had the angels. He had everything else, but he did not have mankind that he could have a real relationship, and so he gave us that, but he then has to allow us to not have that relationship. So, questions as we start this last section here. Is there free will in heaven and on the new earth? When you get to heaven, will you have free will? If there isn't free will, then we are robots in heaven. Do you want to be a robot in heaven? If there is free will, then won't that heaven, by the way, we don't go to heaven, we go to heaven for a short time, and then we go to the new earth that looks a lot like this earth. But this new earth that we're in is going to end up like the old earth, the one we're in right now, right? How does God solve this problem? He's got a dilemma here. Think about it. How do I have people in heaven with free will, or on the new earth with free will, and they don't make a mess of it like we have today? Is there free will in heaven? We already answered this. Now, when God created the universe, he created all these physical laws in place. And we discover these laws as we go around, just like we discover the laws of physics. But there's a better way for us to discover the laws, and that's when he tells us the laws. Right? So the best way, and I say the three ways you learn the law, right? For instance, let's say I'm standing with my daughter and she's like 3 years old, and it's a road, and I say, look, honey, don't walk across the street, you could get hit. That's what we call the revealed law. God reveals it to you. But on the other hand, let's say I'm not there, and she looks at the street and she goes, oh, there are cars here, I could get hurt. That's what we call the conscience law. Right? And then there's a third way, and this is what we call the consequences of the natural law, the school of hard knocks. She walks across the street, she gets hit, hopefully by a bicycle, and she goes, well, that was stupid, I ain't going to do that again. So there are three ways we can discover God's laws, right? We want to discover it through the revealed law. We don't want to discover it through the hard school of the hard knocks, or as I would tell my kids, the owie method, right? So, we agreed that God has to allow evil. Now, is it required by God that he step in and stop every evil action by others? And the answer is no. Is he required to step in and protect us from the consequences of our own foolish actions? And the answer is no. Is it better that we consider learning from our own experiences and creating a society that would limit the evil actions by others? So we learn the revealed law, and then what it results in, we then apply. When the lessons we learn in the natural law, we apply. Right? Now, although it turns out the Bible has a lot of stuff in there, right? It took years for mankind to discover bacteria, but Moses told us to wash our hands. But it wasn't until the 1800s that they believed in bacteria. So people were washing their hands, and there's a whole story about that in my book. I talk about it, of this doctor who asked people to wash their hands. He didn't know why, but he said the Jews did it, and it seemed to work, and they thought he was crazy. His name was Ignaz Semmelweis. Go look him up. Okay, so, but here's the emotional part. Why doesn't God at least protect the innocent? Right? Or why doesn't he act supernaturally to protect good people? Right? Well, here's why. With free agents, it's not incumbent on God to intervene. If God were to stop evil from being acted out, then a free agent is still not truly free. And God allows evil to further his purposes. Remember the blind man, Joseph, Jesus, even Jesus, right? Jesus was crucified. That was an evil thing that brought about good things. And sometimes God has to prod you or push you to make you do something. You have to lose that job. You have to lose that relationship, right? But then here's another reason why God allows bad things to happen. Because he's put into place a group of people to come to your aid when bad thing happens, and that is the church. Like this church, right? When something happens to somebody in this church, the church gathers around them, right? Because we, the church, are his bride and his agents of mercy, right? We are the workers, the ministers, and the trainers. We're the ones who go in and say, look, God has allowed, and then what does God do? He uses that to minister and bring people to save. Now, in the Bible, God usually intervenes supernaturally in a clear way just before he does something very big and very critical to his long-term plan. Because I talked to somebody and they said, well, Neil, in the Bible, God's coming in and doing all these supernatural things. Why is he not doing it here? And I said, hang on, let's talk through this. How many years does the Bible cover? They're like, well, about 1,500 years. I go, you know how many miracles are in the Bible if you count them all? They said, I don't know. I said, well, I've counted them. They're about 500. So 1,500 years that you're getting maybe one miracle a year in the entire population. I'm sure there are other miracles that weren't reported, but in the Bible population, there was only one every 3 years. And I said it wasn't really even one every 3 years. It was like 20 or 30 before something big happened. And then for hundreds of years, nothing would happen. And then suddenly you get another one, and Jesus shows up, and then you have a whole bunch of miracles, right? And then the apostles do the day of Pentecost, and then you have another bunch of miracles. And then for years we don't have miracles. God still does miracles, but it's for certain things for his purpose. So if God does a miracle in your life, it's not because you did something stupid. It's because God is going to use you or something in a special way. So if we ever see a miracle in the Bible, it's because God's about to use you. Make sure you figure out what that is. So even in your life, God does intervene occasionally to bring about changes in society and you, to mold you. It's just not always what you wish he would do. It's like, I need help. I need a job. Well, maybe you got to wait. Still look. You got to look. But maybe God's asking you to look at somewhere else. Right? Okay. So we just answered why God allows bad things to happen. But what about natural disasters? Because the answer is, oh, well, last week there was an earthquake. Right? What happened? Why would God allow floods, earthquakes, and forest fires? Well, it turns out that there's something very important about this. It is possible in this current universe, God cannot create a habitable world with wind, which we need, but no volcanoes or earthquakes. Why? Because then all the land would erode below the level of the sea. And we need water. In fact, we need more water than we have land. That's why the world is 3/4 water. But if we allowed all the sand with no earthquakes and we need the wind, it would all erode. What about hurricanes? We'd have no temperature equalization. How about floods? No nutrients would be replenished in the soil, right? Could God create a world that doesn't have it? He did. He didn't. He could, but he hasn't, and that's what the new world will be. So what about catastrophes? Slow floods. You violate physical laws. You can't have physical law, and you need the floods to replenish the nutrients. What about slow earthquakes? Again, violates physical laws. What about weak hurricanes? You can't make a weak hurricane. What about famines and forest fires? Almost every one of these are man-preventable. Right? What about diseases? Many are man-preventable. In fact, if we spend more time fighting the diseases and not giving big corporations excuses to avoid them, we would be solving, and less time fighting each other, we'd be solving more diseases. Right? Almost every natural disaster and disease can be prevented from causing death by human collaboration and technology. How many of you guys remember the Loma Prieta earthquake? You're dating yourselves, right? Loma Prieta earthquake is 7.1 on the Richter scale. 7.1. How many people died? 70. Most of them in Santa Cruz or San Francisco in buildings that were not up to code. Right? A few weeks later, or a few months later, I don't remember exactly, there was an earthquake of 6.9 in Iran. I think that's what, 20 times less or something like that? Or whatever, it's less, it's smaller than the 7.1. Now, how many people died in Iran? 70,000 people died in Iran. There was no need for that. And the reason it happened is because of corrupt people there. All the technology we knew about buildings, they knew about buildings. But it was bribing people to allow you to build a building any way you wanted, and rather than observing the requirements. And then here's the other thing. Man causes evil. The evil one person does will affect others, like your parents, Adam, Hitler, Che Guevara, Stalin. The only way to stop a person from doing evil is either destroy him or restrain him. Remember we talked about that. If God wants to stop all evil, he's got to start killing people. And where does he start? Does he start with you? Right? If God were to start eliminating all free agents who have sinful desires, he would have to eliminate you and me as well. Now we come to the real point of this as we start wrapping up here. Why is there pain in my life? Why couldn't God take away the pain? Let's think about this. Imagine a world with free moral agents that had no pain. How would we know what to do? Every law would have to be a revealed law. You know, the 613 laws in the Bible. We'd have to have a few trillion laws, right? Without God intervening on a daily basis, without pain to guide us, we'd have this massive book that for every single circumstance. It would be very restrictive, it would be very legalistic, it would not be a relationship at all, would it? It's a bunch of rules. So let's have an interview with a man who does not feel any pain. Here's a man who is suffering from leprosy, does not feel pain. Here's what he says. He says, leprosy doesn't eat away at my body, it just desensitizes my skin. The problem is I feel no pain in my extremities. By the time I realize my fingers or legs are in danger, it's too late and the damage is already done. They fall off due to cell damage. I need pain to know that I'm in danger. You're lucky that you feel pain. It protects you. By the way, we do have a cure for leprosy now. I gave this talk once, and a gal came up and says, well, Neil, what about other ways that God could warn us rather than pain? I'm like, okay. Pleasant warnings. We wouldn't pull back like drinking and driving, right? Oh, yeah, this is a nice warning, but it's a warning. I have to learn that it's a warning, right? No, we're not going to do that. You know, what about mental knowledge about danger? No, that doesn't work. Well, you know, it would signal like speeding, texting and driving, dating non-Christians, right? We, we all learn, we know it's a bad idea. What about a different sensation? We would ignore it just like every other. Pain has to hurt, or it does not work. But I have a saying. I say, Lord, don't waste the pain. Pain is there to teach me something, right? So when I have a situation of pain, I'm like, Lord, okay, what is it that you're trying to teach me? Because I want to learn that now and not have to relive the pain all over again. And so my prayer now is, Lord, let me learn from other people's pain and not my own. All right? So I see somebody suffering. I'm like, what is the lesson there? And pain and suffering have a purpose. I'm going to go this real quick. It's to protect us, to refine us, to humble us, to protect us. What was the first one? To teach us, to allow us to understand and minister to others, and to glorify God like the blind man, and to prove a point. The disciples all died claiming they'd seen Jesus rising from the dead. If the disciples had not died for that, we would have no good reason to believe that they really believed that Jesus rose from the dead and didn't make it up. Right? Evil serves a purpose. Romans 9 says evil has a purpose. It can be used to glorify God. Remember when Pharaoh was destroyed? What we intend for evil, God and Joseph. If God were to destroy all evil, he'd have to destroy all of us. So let's talk about temporal pain. Pain has a purpose because even with temporal pain, there's a purpose. Like you go to the dentist, childbirth, right? There's temporal pain, but you know there's something. Exercise. I hate that temporal pain. You can tell. I need to work out more, right? Temporal pain seems terrible, but it's only 80 years. Think about it, right? If you have temporal pain now, but it gives you eternal life, isn't it better that you went through temporal pain? Absolutely. Right? Put in external perspective, pain or suffering isn't that terrible. Now, of course, it's easy for me to say with my luxurious life. Right? There are other issues that people bring up. Some people suffer and others don't because of the seemingly random interaction of truly free agents. Genetic defect, and that's because every reaction, when you do something sinful, there are consequences to it. And it could be random, it seems, but it's all tied together. Genetic defects are caused by mutation due to increased radiation. So there are other effects in all this, and we just have to understand how all this works together. And the reality, though, is that God is working through all this pain. He knows what's going on, and he is going to redeem it in the end. So now we come to God's dilemma or God's ingenuity. I'm giving you a lot on this one. Usually I split this up into 2 talks. So bear with me as I wrap this up with a few more points here. Remember we talked about, in a talk, we have an issue, right? God wants free agents. But free agents will mess things up. Free agents will commit crimes, and like the rapist, free agents will rebel. So God has a dilemma. Is he a God of love or is he a God of justice? Right? If he's a God of love, then how does he punish somebody? But if he's a God of justice, then how does he love someone? And God can't compromise on justice or love. So what was his solution? God had a very ingenious solution. What was the solution? He says, I will give people free will because I want a relationship with them. But the freedom to give them a relationship is the freedom for them to do bad things. So he comes up with a solution. He says, look, I will give them freedom. They will do evil, but I will give them a way out of that. I will work with them to renew their mind and to redeem them, to restore them, and then to meet my justice, I will die for them. Now God is a God of love and he's a God of justice. In the same way, he has a problem with heaven. He's got a dilemma in heaven. How is he going to solve that dilemma? And remember this question with the atheist. He says, Neil, I'm one of the many reasons. He says, God flooded the earth and killed everyone. And he's talking about the Israelites killing the Jericho and all that stuff. So I want to answer this question here. First of all, you don't have a soul. You're like, what? No, you don't have a soul. None of you have souls. You go, wait, is this heresy? No, it isn't. Let me tell you why you don't have a soul. You don't have a soul because you are a soul. What you have is a body. Get that? You don't have a soul. You are the soul. That's you. What you have is this body, right? God never kills a soul. You will never cease to exist once you're conceived. You will live forever. Physical death is merely the movement of one plane to another plane after discarding our three-dimensional body. We have a three-dimensional body, but God is a supernatural. God is extra-dimensional, and He's created these multiple dimensions. And so our body, when our body dies, you don't die. In fact, you get closer to God in many ways. In my book, Who is Agent X, I actually explained that there are about 6 other dimensions scientifically that we can explain, right? And in God's extra-dimensional existence, death is similar from moving from one continent to another. We move from a 3-dimensional existence to a 10-dimensional existence. So you don't cease to exist, you just go somewhere else. Death is a transition from a limited 3-dimensional existence to a vast, multi-dimensional, amazing existence. Now, here's why this is important. Because God never kills anybody. So to the atheist, right? We are not allowed to kill people, but God is allowed to transport some from a limited set of dimensions into His presence for judgment. Thus, the physical killing of anybody, while evil for us, is not an example of evil by God. Get that? When God allowed all those people to die of the flood, when He had asked the Israelites to kill the people in Jericho, what was He doing? He was saying, I have the authority. I created these people. I can move them to a different plane. But He's not killing them. He's just moving them. So when the atheist asks you that question, you go, no, that doesn't work. In fact, here's the danger. Here's the scary part. God will never kill you. I had a friend who was an atheist, and I said, you know, what scares me more than anything is that you will exist forever. And if you're existing forever away from the God you need, it's going to be a terrible existence. And that scares me about anything else, that you will exist forever apart from God. And he told me, he says, you know, that means a lot to me. He later became a Christian, actually, which is interesting. Interesting story there. But you were designed to live with God, to have an eternal relationship with Him. We all have a God-shaped hole in our soul, and if I despise God, I can try and fill it with many other things, drugs, alcohol, sex, money, power, but none of it will fulfill my need for that relationship, because I was pre-programmed for that relationship. And when I fill it with other things, it's not going to work. And eternity is a terrible, terrible, lonely place with a hole that can only be filled by someone whom your pride and self-centeredness won't allow you to have a relationship with. So let me wrap this up here with answering this question and the 2 questions that we're left. Is there free will in heaven? Is there free will on the new earth? And why does evil exist? And here's the real explanation to why there is suffering. Remember that girl I was meeting with, and she'd just come out of the army, and she was doubting her faith. And at the end of this, she asked about the problem of evil. And I presented all this information to her, and I said, let me ask you a question. Did you go to boot camp? She was like, yeah, of course I went to boot camp. I was in the army. I said, well, why did you go to boot camp? She says, well, because I could be honed, refined, so I could be ready to do the real work. Boot camp's not real work. It's just the preparation for the real work. It's a training. Also, so we could be screened. Boot camp helps separate the ones who would stay loyal in battle from, and who would stand in the heat of battle, and those who would run away in the battle. It helps separate those who would never quit regardless of circumstance from those who just give it lip service. I said, oh, great, that's a great definition. I said, let me ask you this, was it easy? And then she laughed at me. She goes, was it easy? No, she said, it wasn't easy. Think of it. Can it be? If it's easy, it's not going to work, is it? It can't be easy. It has to separate the 2 people. Then I said, well, did you get hurt in boot camp? And then she said, did I get hurt? Of course I got hurt. And said, look, this is where my gun misfired. This is where the barbed wire that was crawling under got me. And I'm like, okay. And then I said, let me ask you this. Given that it didn't destroy you, given that you graduated from boot camp, would you give up any of those scars or those experiences? And she said, no. Are you kidding? It's what makes me who I am. It's my branding. Folks, you're in boot camp. This is boot camp. Look around you. You're in boot camp. How does God solve this serious problem of not stripping your free will in the new earth and in heaven, and yet allow you and prevent you from degrading it into the current earth? He has to refine you here on earth and prepare you, and he separates the sheep from the goats in boot camp. Folks, we're in boot camp. And you go, well, how do I know when I graduate from boot camp, I'll be that person that God wants me to be? It's the same reason why I have no compulsion to stick myself in the eye with this pointer. It's stupid. I've grown to the point where I know I'm not going to do it because it's stupid. It's the same reason why I would never cheat on my wife, because it's stupid. Right? I have no desire for that. Because what I have with my God and my wife and my kids is far more important than anything else. And it's the same thing when you get out of boot camp. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do that because I've been through boot camp. This is boot camp. It's here to train you and refine you and to separate those who would sin in heaven from those who would never do so. It's to separate the sheep and the goats and to sanctify those who are being saved. God is preparing you, refining you, sanctifying your boot camp. So the question is, who will you be in 10 years? How will you react to pain? Will you grow up with the challenge or give up? Will you get hard and angry? Or will you ask, Lord, what is it that you would have me learn in my pain? How do you survive boot camp? Especially when it seems like the enemy is running it. Well, there are 5 things I want you to do. 1, you understand the purpose of your life, and that's boot camp. You understand that pain is the effect of sin, and you understand that God will finish the work in you. He's not going to give up in you, and you cannot fall out of God's plan. I have friends who say, well, you know, the best place to be is in the center of God's plan. I'm like, it's all God's plan. Even the stupid things you do. It was God's plan, because he was going to refine you. Now try not to do those stupid things. You know, it says life is tough. It's tougher if you're stupid. Remember, boot camp's only for a season. And then when you graduate, you can graduate from boot camp early and you can be a boot camp trainer, like Pastor Jeff. It's like, oh, I've had the hard knocks. When I first met Jeff, I thought he was part of the mafia. And then over the years, I'm like, dude, this guy's a godly man. So we can understand the pain and suffering if we know the person going through a tooth extraction isn't going, why does the dentist hate me? Because, like, I know why he's doing this. So if you know why God is doing something to you, like, no, God doesn't hate you. He loves you. He wants to refine you. Just don't be stupid next time. Now, sometimes you do stuff and you get hurt because somebody else did it, and it hurt you. You're like, okay, I understand what's going on here. How do I solve this problem that somebody else caused for me? If the pain is not caused by your actions, then it's not your fault. Don't blame yourself. But you need to know that God has a plan to use that. And you need to look for the way out that God is trying to teach you. Right? God desires a relationship with you. So, here's the questions you should ask yourself when things are falling apart. Well, what is this the cause of a bad decision? Right? Was it an immoral decision or just a poor one or something you're learning? You know, I made a decision, it was a bad investment, now I learned the message, right? If not, what was the cause of something I did not know about, or something I was learning? Did someone betray me, right? These are lessons. If not any of those, was this test supposed to be teaching, what is this test supposed to be teaching me? How is it supposed to refine me? How does this test prepare me for eternity? If I have cancer, what is God going to use? Are there alternative things I need to learn? Where is it going? Remember, and this is the thing, remember that teenager I was talking about who said, my dad just died and I don't understand it. I said, let me ask you this. What is the purpose of life? He said, to prepare us for eternity. I said, your dad was prepared. Right? He says, well, what about if like somebody else is doing better or worse? He says, that's not what it's about. This is not our life. That is our life. And if you have an eternity perspective, all of a sudden you go, okay, what is it I'm learning? Because I'm going to use this. You're like, we're not going to be sitting on a cloud playing a harp in heaven. We're going to be on the new earth, and God needs workers for us, for Him. So, it's not about this life. It's about eternity. Oh, sorry. Do you want to take a picture? You can get these slides. I'll make sure Jeff has these slides. Okay, so how do you survive? Okay, I went back too far. So here's the next question. So do the best that you can, then view all trials in the context of eternity, but do so without being fatalistic. Not to act is to act, not to speak is to speak. Not to speak out is to speak out by not acting. So I want to finish with this. Would a loving God abandon us in this boot camp? Boot camp is tough. God would never abandon us in this boot camp. He says, I love you. I cannot be distant from you. I want a relationship with you. I cannot be separate from you. I love you, and I cannot let you suffer alone. I will share in your sorrows. I will participate in your sin. And He comes to earth, and He suffers with us. He suffers rejection, injustice, abuse, physical torment, and then He dies. He comes alongside us, and He shares our pain and our suffering. See, God, desiring to be loved by free agents, gives Adam free will, knowing fully well that Adam's choice would be create pain in the world. But God cannot do that which is illogical. He cannot do that which is irrational. He cannot do that which makes no sense. So He, desiring our love, gives us our freedom. But then He says, I know you will choose wrongly. I know you will suffer. So first I'll give you my family, the bride, the Christ, the church will be there for you. And then I will suffer alongside you, because in my suffering I will redeem you. By my stripes I will heal you. My blood shall be poured out for you, and through my death I will save you. And all things the Holy Spirit will be with you. See, God desires a relationship with you. So my friends, go now and get trained for the real work that there is. Yes, there will be stars, but it is your branding. And when you are on the other side of the eternity, you will be loath to give up your branding. Now, thank you. Go earn your branding.